Ah yes, 1995. The year that brought us Kendall Jenner, Logan Paul, and Tim Burton's Batman Forever. I think we can all probably agree it was a terrible time all round. I actually don't mind Batman Forever, but I'm happy to go with the majority on this one. Sadly, there wasn't much reprieve for fans of video games either, and although the likes of Chrono Trigger, Super Mario World 2, and NHL 96 did really well with both critics and players, there were plenty more games that weren't worth bothering with. For today's serving of horrible titles, we've traversed the archives of online review aggregators to bring you the definitive list of awful games from the year 1995. Okay, fine, they're not all awful actually, but they are worse than most. As ever, a game must have received a minimum of 7 professional reviews in order to qualify for this list, otherwise we'd be forever trying to rifle through a bunch of uni students' failed final year projects and other such unnoteworthy offerings. I don't have time for that, and neither do you. In fact, should we get on with it? I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst games of 1995. Number 10. Gex, PlayStation, 63.33%. Before you say anything, I know I'm as shocked as you are. It turns out, however, that though we may remember Gex quite fondly, it wasn't received particularly well by critics. That's not to say they didn't like it, it's just that the general consensus was that Gex was merely okay. The game itself followed the titular Gex, a TV-loving gecko, as he was sucked into the media dimension. Gex had to traverse a variety of levels, each themed around a different genre, in order to defeat antagonist Rez. The game was originally released for the 3DO in April 1995 and was ported to the PlayStation and Sega Saturn later that year. Though the original ended up with an average review score of 79%, the PlayStation port didn't fare quite so well. There was some praise for the game's sense of humour, graphics, and sound, but it drew a lot of comparison to other platformers of the time and received criticism for levels that some reviewers found to be dull and frustrating. Regardless of what critics had to say though, Gex was part of many gamers' childhoods, and nothing can ever take away from the nostalgia the game stirs up. Not even its appearance on this list. Shocking, I know. Number 9. The 11th Hour, PC, 63.2%. Arguably, the key to making a great video game sequel is to take everything the original did well and build upon it in new and exciting ways. Unfortunately, this is often easier said than done, and developers can either get caught up trying too hard to innovate, or they effectively just clone the previous game. The 11th Hour sadly fell into the latter category. The game was a follow-up to 1993's The Seventh Guest, and tells the story of Robin Morales, a reporter who has gone missing while on the hunt for secrets in the dilapidated home of evil genius Henry Stauff. The 11th Hour did receive praise from many critics for its graphics, its storyline, and for its variety of challenging puzzles. Despite all of this though, it was just too similar to The Seventh Guest, and though it did refine certain elements, most notably its graphics, through the use of a more modern engine, that was about the only new thing it brought to the table. That fancy new engine also proved to be a bit of a double-edged sword, as players without a high-end computer found that the game suffered from excruciatingly long load times. Still, it sold over 300,000 copies, so clearly it was pressing the right buttons for some players. Like I said in the intro, not every entry in this list is actually that bad. Number 8. Todd McFarlane's Spawn, the video game, SNES, 61.27%. This isn't the first time we've seen the good name of Todd McFarlane dragged through the mud on one of these lists, though if the numbers are anything to go by, Todd McFarlane's Spawn the video game is almost twice as good as 2004's McFarlane's Evil Prophecy. Based on McFarlane's comic book character Spawn, the game was a side-scrolling beat-em-up that saw the titular hero attempting to save the lives of several children by using his arsenal of powers and platforming his way about the place. When it came to reviews, it didn't seem like critics could agree on much. While some felt the game was faithful to its source material, others felt it didn't really capture the essence of the comics. There was also praise for the graphics from some reviews, whereas others were of the opinion that they were fine for a 16-bit machine, but in comparison to those seen on newer 32-bit consoles, they seemed outdated. Most did agree, though, that the game was repetitive and lacking in innovation. and whilst it would probably have been good fun for fans of the comic books, everyone else could just expect a fairly generic and, at times, frustratingly difficult experience. Number 7. Roberta Williams' Phantasmagoria, PC, 59.17%. There are some video game series that start out great and gradually get worse as time goes on. Conversely, there are those whose first entry is a bit naff, but who find their feet in later games. Phantasmagoria doesn't sit in either of those categories though, as neither the 1995 original nor its 1996 follow-up, Phantasmagoria: A Puzzle of Flesh, were particularly good. It wasn't for lack of trying. Prior to Phantasmagoria's development, designer Roberta Williams wrote a 550-page script for the game. It took over 2 years to develop, involved a team of more than 200 people, and cost a whopping $4.5 million. This is 1995 we're talking about, what the hell? Reviews were mixed, and though many publications praised Phantasmagoria for its attempts to capture the attention of a more mature audience, there were a great number of critics for whom this ambition wasn't enough. The graphics were mostly well received, but some found the story to be cliché, and the level of difficulty to be too low for more experienced gamers. The over-the-top violence also managed to outrage a number of parents and politicians, because of course it did. This controversy didn't hurt the game too badly though, as within the first week of its release it had sold over 300,000 copies. I guess it's true what they say about there being no such thing as bad publicity. Number 6. Addams Family Values, SNES, 55.67%. Uh-oh, here we go. The graphics are atrocious, the game mechanic's broken. I wish that I was joking, this game's a travesty. Okay, fine, travesty might be a bit of a strong word, but like many movie tie-ins, Addams Family Values was not wonderful. According to the description on Moby Games, Addams Family Values is an action-adventure game with slight RPG elements. Though considering that the extent of this was that protagonist Uncle Fester gained additional hit points as he leveled up, they probably should have gone with a stronger adjective than slight. Might I suggest non-existent, perhaps? Though the franchise's sense of humour was very much present in the SNES title, it wasn't enough to save the game from mediocrity. The vast majority of the gameplay boiled down to couriering items from one place to another, which, unsurprisingly, got boring pretty quickly. That is, of course, if Fester wasn't killed en route by one of the game's many hidden and unavoidable traps. There was also little in the way of love for the game's saving mechanics, which required players to write down a ridiculously long password before they could switch the game off. Oh, and you thought just remembering to hit the save button was a pain in the arse. Number 5. Frankenstein Through the Eyes of the Monster, PC, 55%. It saddens us here at Team TripleJump to see the talents of a national treasure squandered on trash. So although Frankenstein Through the Eyes of the Monster isn't the absolute worst game on this list, we've decided to award it the TripleJump Special Commendation for hiring Tim Curry and then wasting him on a rubbish game award, 1995. The title could be a bit snappier, admittedly, but we think it makes the point quite nicely. In fairness, Curry puts in a smashing performance in Frankenstein Through the Eyes of the Monster, but in and of itself, a strong leading lad does not a good game make. The game follows Philip, writer of our ranked lists, and recently deceased man resurrected at the hands of Dr. Frankenstein, as he traverses Frankenstein's castle to find the secret to reanimation. I think you'll find that Frankenstein was the name of the monster, not the doctor. Frankenstein drew a lot of comparisons to 1993's Myst, but although the graphics and FMV sequences garnered praise from critics, the actual gameplay received a great deal of negativity. The pace of the game was incredibly slow, the environments were dull, and the story ended up being nonsensical. Response to the puzzles was mixed as well, as though some reviewers found them to be engaging, others quickly got bored. In short, if you're looking for brain teasers with a side of Tim Curry, I don't know, do a Sudoku while watching the Rocky Horror Picture Show or something. Number 4. Doom, SNES, 54.05%. Hang on, this can't be right. Let me just... Hello there, is that the writer? Yeah, just calling to ask whether you've lost your goddamn mind, that's all. Okay, talk to you later, bye. It turns out the writer hasn't lost their goddamn mind, and though on the whole, Doom is one of the greatest games of all time, its SNES port was a bit rubbish. Now don't get me wrong, it was still playable, and by most accounts was a thoroughly enjoyable experience, but in comparison to other versions, especially the PC one, Doom for the SNES fell somewhat short. The main problem was that owing to its technical capabilities, the SNES was unable to replicate the experience of playing Doom on more advanced machinery. The fundamentals were there, it was still a first-person shooter, players were still tasked with sending a bunch of demon spawn back into the fiery pits of hell whence they came, and it was still all accompanied by a banging soundtrack. The graphics, however, were completely naff. Admittedly, Doom on any platform isn't much to look at by today's standards, but when it was released in 1993, it was something really special. The SNES, though, was incapable of recreating the overall look of the game, resulting in a port that was pixelated, jumpy, and in places unresponsive. I guess you could say that it was, doomed to fail. I'm here all week. Thank you very much. Thank you. Number 3, Justice League Task Force, Genesis, 44.67%. So far, this list has been populated by mediocre offerings, and whilst it certainly is a crime against video games to be bland, boring, and forgettable, we'd be willing to let our previous entries go with merely a slap on the wrist. These next 3, however, right to jail.
Right to jail, right away.
The problem with Justice League Task Force was twofold. It wasn't Mortal Kombat, nor was it Street Fighter. Because those two properties dominated the fighting market at the time, everything of similar ilk drew comparison, usually negative. Sadly, this was certainly the case for Justice League Task Force, as it barely even tried to tread any new ground. And aside from not really bringing anything fresh to the table, Justice League Task Force was criticised for all of the usual bad game stuff. Credit to the developers, the sprites at least looked quite nice, when they were still. Once animated, however, they were an ugly, choppy mess. Justice League Task Force also suffered from unresponsive controls, which is irritating at the best of times, but when you're trying to execute an elaborate finishing move, it's frankly unforgivable. Maybe they should have deployed that task force to sort out the problems with the game mechanics. Number 2, Secret of the Stars, SNES, 44.8%. Originally released in Japan in 1993, Secret of the Stars was an RPG that didn't make it to North American shores until July 1995, though anyone who's played it will probably tell you that they wish it had never made it at all. Secret of the Stars was a turn-based RPG that followed the story of Ray and his Aquatalian warriors, I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong, as they embark on a quest to destroy the evil wizard Homuncrews, I'm definitely also pronouncing that wrong. One of the main concerns raised by critics was that the plot was difficult to follow, not because it was that complex, but more due to the fact that the translation was done poorly, often resulting in objectives that were impossible to understand. Not only did the story make little sense, but Secret of the Stars was also quite an ugly game with horrible sound. Some reviewers commented that the graphics would have been okay had they been on the NES, but on the SNES, they were inexcusable. One critic even went as far as to recommend that if you receive it as a gift from a relative, never speak to them again, which is harsh, but also entirely appropriate. And number 1, Venom/Spider-Man Separation Anxiety, Genesis, 35.83%. Do you remember what we said earlier about a series starting out strong and then going downhill when it comes to sequels? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Venom/Spider-Man, do you pronounce the slash? I don't know. Separation Anxiety. You definitely don't pronounce the colon, do you? They should have called this punctuation anxiety. The follow-up to 1994's Spider-Man and Venom, Maximum Carnage, Separation Anxiety was a side-scrolling beat-em-up that allowed players to jump into the shoes of the two titular popular superheroes. Maximum Carnage garnered reasonable review scores, especially on the Genesis. It was true to the comics, challenging but not overly so, and most of all, it was fun to play. Its sequel, on the other hand, was repetitive and completely unoriginal. In terms of things like graphics and sound, most critics agreed that Separation Anxiety was on par with its predecessor, but that's where the compliments ended. Though the controls worked fine, there wasn't an awful lot to them. Mostly, enemies could be defeated by just jumping around a bit and repeatedly smashing the attack button. Players also found the combat to be unfair, as enemies were capable of dealing damage that was impossible to avoid no matter what you did. Separation anxiety? More like, this game is so bad it's giving me just like the regular kind of anxiety that I'd suffer with week to week. Oh, got 'em. What a way to end the video. Alright, bye everyone. See you later.